Getting the most out of your raw files can mean different things to different people, and even for seasoned photographers, it's a good idea to try something new every now and then and see how your photos look afterwards. So what I'm proposing today, it's a tool that's mostly used in the video industry, but I figured out a way to use it inside of Lightroom. So if you already know what false color is, jump to this timestamp, but if you don't, false color is an exposure tool that most photographers never use because it requires one of those. This is an external monitor and you usually have to mount it on top of your camera in order to use it. This makes the entire rig pretty heavy, and let's not mention how annoying it will be when you're gonna try to take vertical photos and this thing will throw the mass of the camera over your wrist. But let's go back to false color for a second. It looks something like this. At least my version does, and there are a few others out there and they look like this, or this. And what false color does is map colors to the different brightness levels in your shot. This is super useful because now you can tell at a glance that that light over there is almost clipping or that my face is perfectly exposed, with the bright side being a bit overexposed and the shadow side being just a bit underexposed. And it also helps with positioning your lights, because right now I can easily tell that my t-shirt is almost clipping, and that's because I don't have a flag in front of my light right here to make it softer on the t-shirt and harsher on my face. So while I would love to use false color while shooting as well, as a photographer is a bit unpractical at the moment. But I'm also a Lightroom nerd, and because of that, I figured out a workaround to get false color directly into Lightroom. And that workaround was baking it into a camera profile. So all I have to do to enable it is come in here and select False Color Pro instead of Adobe Standard that I was using before. And now, as you can see, the false color reacts to the adjustments that I'm making to the photo. But since this is a photo that's already edited, let me reset it, and I'm going to start editing from the beginning so I can show you how useful false color is while you are editing. So really fast, let's start by getting the right white balance in this photo, and I'm gonna do that by pushing the vibrance and saturation to 100%. Now I can see that the photo is super warm out of the camera. I'm gonna push the white balance down just enough so my background starts to go blue, but my highlights remain pretty warm. And now I can see that the photo was pretty magenta, and I'm pushing the green tint just a bit to get rid of all that magenta. Now I'm going to reset the vibrance and saturation, and let's take care of our exposure by enabling the False Color Pro in the camera profile. And in here we can already see something that might not have been immediately obvious before I enabled false color. My photo has a pretty severe vignetting, and I'm gonna deal with that by enabling the correction for my lens over here, and I'm also gonna check remove chromatic aberration. This way we can already see how the background has way less vignetting onto it, and if you want to tone that down you can do it with this slider, which I'm going to do at a moderate amount. Now I can also see that my highlights, or spots where the lights was hitting my face, are just barely over the 50% mark, and I want those to feel pretty bright. So let's push the highlights up in my photo until I'm starting to see yellow in those highlights, because remember, on my graph yellow means around 70%, and that's where I want my highlights to be on my face. I'm also going to push the whites just a tiny bit to pump that up, and I can see that I'm starting to get pink on my shirt over here, which means that those are starting to get pretty bright as well. On the other side of the photo, I don't want all those details and the way this hangs over here to be visible in my final photo. So I have two options. I can tone down my shadows, and this is going to start to affect the entire photo, but I can see that my beard is starting to clip because it's going into deep blues or purples. So instead of doing that and ruining the shadows in the entire photo, I'm gonna start and apply my first mask. This is gonna be a linear gradient, so let's create that. I'll cover most of the lower part of the image with it, place it just a bit down, and now let's lower our shadows and also play around with the curves just a bit to decrease the contrast in that area and make sure nothing is clipping. And I'm also going to raise the black levels just a bit because I want to be mindful of these dark areas in my beard over here and make sure they don't clip. But as I'm raising the black level, you can see how that green zone extends, and that means that the black level is also affecting the background, and it's gonna create a bit of a bending if I don't pay attention to that as well. And if I turn off false color, you're gonna see that that's pretty hard to notice with the naked eye. And before I get sidetracked with other details, let me go back into false color, and I'm gonna focus on getting the contrast throughout the entire image right, because I want the hotspot on the face to be pretty bright and the environment in the photo to be a bit darker. I'm going to lower the contrast, which is actually going to brighten up the image, and we can see that because the blues turned into greens. And now I'm going to use the curve tool. I'm gonna use the eyedropper thingy and pull down on the shadow side of my face because I want more contrast on the face, and I also want the background to get pretty dark. And just like that, we can see that the contrast in the photo is much better. And now I can actually go in and apply one of my film simulations, and just like that, the photo is starting to look great. And as a little side note here, the curve tool is actually going to work as expected, even though you have the crazy colors on top of your photos, so don't worry about that. And with this photo here, all it's left to do is add a bit of grain and increase the vibrance and saturation just a tiny bit, and it's starting to feel like sun was shining on my face. And also, I could have used a photo with actual sun of my face and compare against that with false color enabled to be sure that I'm getting at least close to the right contrast ratio between the highlights of my face and the shadow side. And those were just a few ways that false color can help you get better edits inside of Lightroom. I'm gonna show a few more on my shorts feeds, so make sure to hit subscribe if you wanna see that. But now, let me show you how you can actually get this feature actually work around inside of Lightroom. My journey started inside of DaVinci Resolve, which is the program that I use to edit my videos. And in there, I spent around 2 or 3 hours following this tutorial from Tyler to make my own false color scale on top of a gray scale. You can follow along on his video if you want to make your own, or you can probably just find some false color LUT on the web and use that. The process is not complicated, but it's very time consuming, and if you wanna have something tailored to your preference, I would strongly encourage you to go that route. Now, with the LUT saved on my computer, I opened a raw file inside of Photoshop using Adobe Camera Raw, and in here, if you press and hold the Alt button or probably Option on a Mac, while clicking on this button to create a new preset, you can actually import the false color LUT and save it as a camera profile. And all that was left to do now was restart Lightroom, and the camera profile was here in the browser, and I made sure to click the favorite button to have it available to me in the drop down. And of course, if you don't want to deal with all this, you can head over on my website. I have the false color camera profile available as a Lightroom preset, and all you have to do is click import. This way you have the false color camera profile in just a few clicks, and you're also supporting me in creating more Lightroom tools that can help other photographers with their Lightroom editing workflow. And finally, I want to point out that false color can be a bit of a learning helper as well. For example, in this photo, it's not immediately obvious, especially if you're a beginner, what's going on and what's wrong with the composition and exposure. But if I go in here and enable false color, I can instantly see what my problem is. And it's not just the fact that most of my photo is underexposed or I mostly have shadows in the photo. The real problem is that I'm lacking contrast, and I mean that in relationship to my composition. Because yeah, there is a bit of contrast between the highlights and the shadows, and that can always be tweaked with the contrast slider. The real problem is the relationship between the exposure in the shot and the composition, because my dark hair is right against the shadows in the bushes behind of me, and the highlights on the grass behind of me is right next to the highlights on my shoulder, so I'm not popping out as a background to subject separation. And also, all this light behind of me is not really highlighting me enough to direct the viewer's eye towards me as the subject. And while I could probably save this with a ton of masking, I would rather learn from my mistake and do better in the future. So yeah, False color can also be a tool to help you better up your composition in the future photo shoots. Of course, it would be much easier if we had this kind of preview on camera, but for now, I think we have to settle down with what we can get, and that's false color inside of Lightroom. And because you watch my entire video, you can also get my false color camera profile at a 25% discount using this code at checkout. That was it for today. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!